Director of Planning and Development at Active Travel England, somebody I've been lucky enough to work with a number of times before, and we're still friends miraculously. So that's quite amazing. And Graham's going to talk us through, I'm hopefully a real update on all the exciting stuff that Active Travel England's doing, and the really important mission of integrating Active Travel into everything we're doing around growth, new housing, new developments, all of that good stuff. So without further ado, Graham, can I hand over to you and give you the floor?
You can, but can you hear me, Steve?
We can hear you really well.
Right, sound. Just double checking that. And now, can you confirm you can see the screen as well?
Yeah, we can see that. That looks really good.
Okay. I'm having to sit a mile away from my laptop because the wires that we've got in the office aren't long enough to reach. So can you see a little picture of me there? For those of you who don't know me, my name's Graham Grant, or as some people would reflect on it in the north of England, the man responsible for totally unnecessary schemes. Now, in terms of those schemes, that was a picture that was put up on street furniture at the side of a road, where we weren't even reallocating road space. We were just providing additional segregated and protected cycling facilities that reflected that link on the right-hand side that you can see on the image, which was in red. The yellow lines there had already been treated in terms of various different funding circumstances that had come forward in Newcastle and had enabled us to put in place protected cycling infrastructure and a cycle route, but the red section was missing. Part of the reason why I use this is because up towards the top left of that area, kind of the north of the city, is a huge development site with thousands of homes and new schools. And that section was missing in terms of connecting a corridor. In order to deliver that section, it required pulling together pieces of money from Section 106 funding, from developments, various different things to enable us to piece together a coherent route to be delivered. And often that wasn't necessarily delivered all at the same time because we didn't have the funding circumstances to do so. Obviously, part of the reason why Active Travel England was envisaged originally in 2020 was to try and step into the space of being able to provide multi-year funding settlements and so on. And obviously with the changes that have happened through devolution and other announcements about integrated settlements, city region sustainable transport strategy and so on, enables areas to think more about 5-year windows. We only have 15 staff in our planning casework team, and that compares to 52 planning staff in National Highways, and if you consider it, National Highways are looking at 2% of the highway network in the country, whereas ATE has to consider, alongside others like local highway authorities and so on, 100% of the network. We don't have a huge amount of staff, so we have to be picky as the ones that we look at. We have thresholds, which means that we only get consulted on development sites that are equal to or more than 150 residential units, 7,500 square meters of non-residential, or a site area of 5 hectares or more. We are keeping them under review because there have been some things that have slipped through the net in terms of stuff that we're consulted on, including some school sites and so on. And part of what we've been doing is engaging with local planning authorities and others to make sure that we're getting the right things in terms of those that we're being consulted on. The other thing to note, I think, is quite important in terms of our approach to the first year, is that we recognise that the role that we currently have in the planning system, which is in the development management space, is reasonably far on in terms of the development and gestation of proposals for development sites. And what that means is that a lot of decisions have already been made. One of the things that then brought to us in the first year was it would have been counterproductive for ATE to enter into the space as the latest statutory consultee in the system from June 23 and start demanding things that hadn't been required when a lot of the sites had been going through previous development. We would have lost a huge amount of credibility with the development industry and with local planning authorities and local highway authorities and frustrated the system. That's not what we want to do. We want to help the system in terms of sustainable and appropriate growth, which is built around active travel and integration with public transport. So we've recognized that we're going to have to take an approach which bears in mind pragmatism in terms of what people have been asked to do and how they've been asked to do it. We have issued standing advice notes for developments, and what we will do is we'll run a triage system so that when something comes in, dependent on the amount of resource that we have available, but also kind of various other criteria, will determine whether or not we're going to issue standing advice or whether or not we're going to do a full review of the application. But the other thing that we've been looking at is whether or not we can get involved earlier in the planning system. But in order to try to do that, we had to secure credibility from our performance as a statutory consultee in the first place. In terms of that, I'll go back one slide. One of our objectives have been about supporting councils, sharing best practice, guidance and advice, and so on and so forth. In terms of how we performed in the first year, one of the things that we were aware of is that there has been an understandable narrative about frustrations to the development process in order to move things forward. And the amount of time that things have taken has changed significantly over the years. So has the amount of work that has had to go in. There's been a lot of work done on this. There's a really good report by the Home Builders Federation on this, which actually compares kind of 15 years apart what's required in terms of development applications now versus then. One of the things, therefore, we've been really keen to do is to illustrate that we're not actually asking for anything new in terms of what's been required. We're just actually looking at whether or not people have been providing the type of information that they should have been providing for many, many years. The other thing was to recognize that if we were late with comments, it would give a really obvious means for people to complain about our performance in the planning system. So one of the first things that we prioritized in year one was making sure we were really on time with our responses. In that first year, we had about 99.8% of responses on time. We had more than 1,500 consultation requests, and I think we missed 8. All were due to administrational errors, and then we put in place processes to make sure we caught them. What you can see there on screen is the kind of the makeup as to where these different applications have been coming from. And I think one of the interesting things to note is that I think about 27% of them were from the Southeast. In terms of themes as to why we were recommending deferral, we've only recommended refusal on a handful of schemes across the first year or so in place. Generally speaking, it's because those sites weren't allocated sites either. So it might have been that with certain sites that the type of infrastructure that was coming forward we felt could be improved and so on. But if that was an allocated site within a local authority's area and they were saying we think it's appropriate for development to happen here, generally speaking, what we would do is try to work with people to deliver the best infrastructure that we could. On a handful of occasions, speculative applications have come in areas where even the local authority hasn't deemed it appropriate for development to happen there. And in those circumstances, we would look at recommending refusal. But more than that, generally speaking, in terms of, as opposed to doing that, we would look at deferral to try to discuss with local planning authorities, local highway authorities, the developers, the types of improvements that could be made. And what we've listed there are the themes in terms of why we generally recommended deferral. So forecasting of journeys was limited, technical documents don't include the appropriate analysis, active travel mode share forecasts haven't met local or national targets, there's absence of detail in there. It's unclear how certain things would be prioritized or onward connections would be made. Cycle park and trip end facilities don't meet standards, or the infrastructure doesn't comply with guidance in LTM 120. Also, when we started, we implemented a toolkit, which was our means of looking at different sites as they came forward. It was a really, really good piece of work, and however, it was too long. And it was too long. We stopped using it. Our own operatives stopped using it because of the fact that it was too long. So we set about revising it. We did so with the support of local authorities and also the development community. So we got them involved in sessions to look at what was good and what was bad about it. Some of the things that we've taken into account are shown on the screen there in terms of what we were looking at. What that led to was a revision of the toolkit and the advice notes that we provided. So we have reissued them, and it went from 31 criteria down to 10. It's available to access both on gov.uk, but also on the Active Travel England website. The 10 revised active travel assessment criteria are shown on your screen there. So trip generation and assignment, active travel route audit, pedestrian access to amenities, cycling accessibility, access to public transport, off-site infrastructure, permeability of the site, placemaking, cycle parking and trip end facilities, and travel planning. That's what we've narrowed down the 31 or 32 criteria into. That's then available as an input sheet that what developers or applicants or local authorities can do is use any of this, and it ultimately creates a score looking at how connected the site is and so on, and how it performs against different metrics. The other thing that I think is really important on this is that we really did take into account the views of private sector in this in terms of the language that we use to help both private sector and public sector be in a position to use this as best as possible. Current priorities for the remainder of this financial year, we are aiming to provide the opportunity for some pre-application advice, which is something that has been identified through a one-year review. In terms of that, one of the things that we did, I mentioned earlier on that we needed to take into account our previous performance to build a bit of credibility, to look at other parts of the system that we could work in. To reinforce that, one of the things that we did is we appointed an independent planning consultancy called Litchfields to do an independent one-year review of our performance, which involved engagement with public sector, private sector, and us. It also involved a review of all of our processes and what we were doing, how we were doing it, to create areas for improvement and establish, based on market demand, both from public and private sector, where they felt that we could add the most value. Significant number of respondents to the work that we did in terms of the independent one-year review have said that they'd really like to see Active Travel England involved in pre-application advice, which is a much earlier stage than where we currently operate within the system, and also help in terms of local plan making, which would fit with the announcements that have been made through the National Planning Policy Framework and MHCLG as to the way that they want to reintroduce strategic planning to different areas. We have also been, I'll get onto a couple of resources and products in a second, but we are currently also working on 3 more products on design codes, cycle parking adoptions, and school design standards as well. So kind of how best to design active travel into these different things. We've launched industry forums for both public and private sector so that we can involve them in the development of guidance products and make sure that we're delivering against the things that they want to see. And we're doing some other pieces as well. Another thing that I want to point to, which isn't a product that ATE are leading on at all, it's colleagues in DFT, but is a connectivity tool, which is about equalizing across the country your ability to understand how connected different housing sites or residential or development sites could be based on different modes of transport. We're going to be working with colleagues at DFT in the next year or so to really add to the walking and cycling metrics within that connectivity tool, which at the moment are more focused on public transport, and rightly so. In terms of other things, I wanted to point out, we have got on our website a Planning for Active Places guide. I'm not sure if people have seen that, but if you haven't, please do go and have a look. It's one of the most viewed things on the Active Travel England website. And what that does, in a really easy to understand and navigate way, is it brings together existing policy, guidance, tools, and best practice for designers, based on various different kind of geographical levels. Are you looking at an entire site? Are you looking at a residential street? Are you looking at a main road? And it kind of takes you through the different considerations, summarizes lots of different existing government guidance and best practice into one place, which enables you to navigate it, to understand it. So you don't have to have 5 different physical PDFs in front of you and think about, right, what should I be looking at? We've created an interactive master plan that enables you to look at any of them. We ran that through MHCLG, so they've had awareness of it, and obviously DFT too. It's signposted to over 37 resources, and I'd encourage you to use it. So again, kind of you're able to click through and understand what people should be using and what guidance is appropriate in different locations. Bearing in mind the idea that it was for a quick presentation to you and then Q&As, that's where I'm going to stop now. I've focused on planning and development because that's what I was asked to talk about. But I guess I should also note that certainly for the next 6 months or so, while the Chief Executive of Active Travel England is helping to lead the development of the Integrated National Transport Strategy, I'm stepping into the role of running ATE for the next 6 months as well. So if people want to ask questions more widely, I'll do my best to answer them. But please bear in mind, I've only been in the role for 4 days. Or 2 days, actually. Yeah.
So with that 2-day caveat hanging in the air, Graham, before we go to questions, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for running through that. And it was absolutely on brief because you totally did do a look at developments and toolkits that you've got, which is brilliant. Before we go to the questions that we've got, can you confirm we're okay to share those slides on our website, aren't we? So that everybody here, we've had a couple of questions in the chat as to whether people can see those slides.
Yeah, I'll forward them through to you so that you've got a PDF version as well.
Great. So everybody who wants to follow some of those links that Graham had in those slides, you'll be able to when we post this up. Graham, since I know you've been on here before, I don't know whether it's still Ideas with Beers when you came on, but now that it's Active Travel Cafe, we have a new, hugely democratic process for questions being asked, which is people upvote or downvote. So I'm going to go through them one by one. The question with the most votes is from Ruth Mayorkas, who you may know from Chiswick. Shouldn't someone from ATE be embedded into the National Highways planning so that every new major road or refurbishment has cycle routes running alongside them, as in Ruth's favorite part of the world, the Netherlands. What do you think about that?
One of the first things that we did at Active Travel England was acknowledge the fact that we, as a new executive agency with a focus on what we're focusing on, could be seen by some people to have a different mission to those in national highways, whereas we felt that actually that wasn't necessarily the case. It's about appropriate infrastructure in different locations. We have created a memorandum of understanding with National Highways. We engage with them pretty regularly about how we can improve our processes and how they can add to theirs to take into account changes in the development of schemes. And we engage on a variety of things, including potential funding bids to enable either additional funding to take into account additional space alongside some of their facilities and or alternatives. So we do work with National Highways. We've got a good understanding of what they're doing. I think that they do of us as well, and we do keep in touch with them pretty regularly to make sure that we're trying to work together. One of the things I would notice, particularly in the context of planning and development space, is that the national circular that was issued by government for national highways and the way that they should approach development is to a degree a bit of a sea change in terms of recognizing that things have to be designed in a way that is in a sustainable location in a sustainable way as well. And so that national circular I can provide a link to as well is a really useful document for people to consider in terms of if they ever want to respond to other planning applications or development proposals.
Fab. But yeah, maybe you could just parachute in every so often, Graham, and just draw up a seat at the big table at Highways England and just take over. The next question we got with a massive 15 upvotes. You ready? This is Active Travel England in big stick mode. From Paul Humphreys, what sanctions or levers are Active Travel England prepared to use for those local authorities who will not use LTM 120?
You have to start with what levers or whatever. I can't recall exactly how Paul phrased that there. I think a lot of people, and we've talked about it in this industry for a long time, you need both the carrot and the stick. The thing is, they are responsible for highway standards. That's the fundamental point here. Government and LTM 120 is a DFT document, and ATE are here to help support people not only adopt it but deliver high quality infrastructure for all the reasons that we understand. Ultimately, it is a local highway authority's legal responsibility to determine what is delivered on their highway, and they are the people who are in charge of what standards that they should put in place. One of the things that the devolution white paper does is it makes it clear that local authorities are in charge of those standards, but encourages mayors to make sure that they're aligning those standards wherever possible for the various different reasons and efficiencies it can create. We engage with mayoral combined authorities and the teams there, and we're working with DFT about how best to ensure that the standards that exist and the best practice that exist is moved forward. I think one of the things there is that a lot of stuff exists that is really, really good. Like Manual for Streets, for example, was released when I was a graduate. And 80% of it, I'm sure a lot of people would still say rings true now. The most important thing isn't necessarily the guidance, it's the application. So Paul, I understand the point that you're making. One of the things that is written in, for example, is that when local authorities or mayoral combined authorities who are in receipt of city region sustainable transport strategy funding, when they get their grant letter, it basically says, if ATE determine that the schemes that you're delivered on in line with LTM 120, we reserve the right to claw back the money, less 10% for development funding. So there is that written in terms of the grant conditions that a lot of local authorities are receiving. Ideally, you don't want to be in that situation where you are doing that. The capability ratings that we've been working through in terms of helping to monitor performance of local authorities, generally speaking, has been going really well because local authorities want to improve on what they're doing, and the capability ratings has helped them contextualize their position in comparison to some of their peers. The levers that we have available aren't as numerous as you might think or want them to be. And ideally, we don't want to be in a position whereby we're using them, but we are working on creative ways to make sure that as we move forward, that those highway design standards that local authorities are responsible for can be updated and brought into line with best practice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. Well, if we're staying quite tightly focused on the development process, there's another popular question from Chris Mason, right at the top of the list, is about major site allocation. So what Chris has asked is, do Active Travel England currently review major site allocations in draft local plans? That sounds like quite a big task. I suspect maybe not, but is this the time where big decisions that impact the level of active travel are made in terms of development, location, density, and mix? And so basically, the question is whether you're commenting too late in the process for some of those major decisions that are made for those big site allocations. What are your thoughts on that, Graham?
Well, at the moment, no, we don't comment on them.
Hmm.
And before ATE's planning role was established, we did a questionnaire to a lot of local planning, and this is before I was in post. I say we as the royal we in terms of the team who was setting up ATE, did a questionnaire and a survey of both local planning authorities and some developers as to where they thought that we could add the most value in the system. And it is in that area of both local plans, site determination, and pre-application advice. The thing that was on offer to ATE at that moment in time in terms of role in the planning system was a role in development management. And so our focus has been on delivering to the responsibility that we've been given as best as we can, pragmatically and in a way that improves sites and builds some credibility, while also recognizing that, yes, we feel that we could help local authorities and developers more if we were able to extend into both local plan making and pre-application advice. Clearly, that has an impact on resources because you can't say that you can deliver absolutely everything when you don't have a staff commensurate to enable you to deliver it. So the 1 year review that I mentioned, that independent 1 year review, that brought that out again. And so having developed a bit of credibility in terms of what we were trying to do, there is a view again from both private and public sector that getting involved at that front end of the system would be more beneficial for various different reasons. And so we're working with colleagues at both DFT and MHCLG to explore what the options are there, with the intention that we want to open up a pre-app advice service, certainly in terms of the first as the first step, but recognizing that again we don't have the resource to just fully open it up to absolutely everybody, so we need to make sure that we can pilot and improve on the way that we deliver it. So we're likely to start with Homes England sites to begin with.
Great, thanks, Graham. So next question is slightly more big picture, if you don't mind, because I'm going to go down. I'm actually skipping a couple of the most popular questions just because this is so lovely in the Q&A function, Graham. John Garnsworthy from Get Sutton Cycling, first of all, asked a question and then very politely, which gives you a sense of the Active Travel Cafe crew, then posted a second question saying, MB, you don't need to ask that question if you don't feel it's appropriate, which I think is lovely. So we're going to ask the question, which is, what does Active Travel England consider to be the prospects for a speedy reversal of the national decline in cycling?
Well, I think the lesson has to be that it can be done. And we look to other countries in terms of the type of approaches that they've taken to do it. I think one of the things that we also recognize, look, it's not just about cycling. That's the key thing, about walking, wheeling, and cycling, and how that underpins public transport ambitions. So obviously, the government's development of an integrated national transport strategy is really important. But fundamentally, so is the provision of safe routes that people can decide to travel on. From a lot of the work that we've done, this is the key thing. It's about whether or not people feel safe using the route, and not just, and even just one location. I can see Carlton's asked the question again, which we might get onto in a second. It's like, if there's a part of the route that's safe, but then you meet another area that isn't, then that undermines your confidence in it. I think one of the things that we and local highway authorities that we've been engaging with, an urban transport group and so on, is a recognition of how do you rapidly implement a coherent network without it having to take a huge amount of time. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be working on with them. The other thing is to think about very specific trip generators that aren't going to move massively, things like schools and so on, and think about how we can develop a program which enables significant mode share change based around that one generator, whereby you can, or place where you can access the people who are using it. The main thing, though, I would say is that walking does a huge amount of heavy lifting in terms of the target that we're working towards, and there is a great opportunity for for advancement in terms of cycling, but walking does a huge amount of the heavy lifting.
Brilliant. So Graham, just a quick reality check. I know you got to catch a train. Are we okay for a couple more questions? Are you all right?
Oh yeah.
Brilliant. So let's go to Mark Strong in Brighton, who's asked, how can you, this is a good question, how can Active Travel England influence the consultancy sector, which delivers planning or transport support? And this may be subjective, Mark, and often lags behind what local authorities are up to.
I guess the question back is whether or not that's fair.
Yeah.
A lot of private sector consultancies are really good and want to see the same things delivered. I think part of the problem, we've been in situations before through the planning system, for example, whereby our response to an application is, we feel that you should do this. The consultancy agrees, and the highway authority doesn't, because it doesn't want to set a precedent for something else, and that isn't in its maintenance program and stuff as well. Ultimately, the kind of change, and it links back to the question that was put in before about how do we see a speedy change, is for the entire industry to recognize that there is a moment of change on which they can focus, and everybody moves from there. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is recognizing, again, I point out the application manual for streets still exists. I think a lot of private sector consultants and developments or developers sought to use it for the first 3 years of it being in place, recognized that for whatever reason that they weren't getting the permissions that they needed, and reverted to type, and we've been there ever since. There is an opportunity, to think about how that might be reframed, and both public sector and private sector recognize that from this moment, this is the way that we're moving forward, which creates consistency, and within that creates efficiency in terms of the type of growth that people want to see. And so in terms of that consultancy sector, we do have, in terms of planning, we've got a development forum, so that we're getting the views of both developers and the consultants who they're working with, but also it enables us to provide information on the toolkits and stuff like that that we've done. We've also had a lot of support from other things like Home Builders Federation, the Land Promoters and Development Federation. They bring in a huge amount of the consultancies and developers who are working on this stuff, and enable us rapid routes towards delivering webinars about the toolkits that we're using and how that relates to the types of developments that they should bring forward. I think that they will be quite fleet of foot in terms of responding to these types of things, actually. Obviously, Mark, there'll always be the exceptions who aren't interested in that, but actually as a whole, I think a lot of the development industry and the consultancies around it do want to deliver good stuff. I think what they recognize is that within the context of viability, which often comes up, you get a situation whereby they can't afford to deliver really high quality they consider that they can't afford to deliver really high quality active travel networks that are integrated with public transport provisions that is underpinned and funded before it's actually viable, and also spend many millions of pounds on junction changes. And so I think one of the changes that you've seen in the National Planning Policy Framework more recently that was consulted on is the move towards vision-led planning, but with a recognition that what that needs to be followed up with is a framework that enables people to understand, right, well, if we do invest in active travel and public transport, that legitimizes the idea that that's where our focus is going, not on huge junction changes just on the outskirts of our sites. And that's not unreasonable. You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry about that, Graham. Thanks for having me back there. We've got a question that I want to come to, because you talked about popularity of various schemes right at the outset, when you're talking about your professional career and what you've done. And Lauren Baker in Nottingham has asked, to what extent do you see public opposition or perceived public opposition, slightly different things, as being a barrier to local authorities delivering good quality schemes? What are your thoughts on that at the moment?
I think it is a barrier to high quality schemes. Of course it is. And it's really important that processes enable people to have their say. Like, public consultation is a legal requirement of introducing highway changes, particularly in terms of improvement. When it comes to certain types of maintenance, you just need to inform people that you're doing it, as opposed to consult with them on it. It's a key part of the democratic process. The other thing to recognize, and particularly through my experience, is that when you look at the number of people who live in an area or who travel through an area, and then you look at the types of responses that you get, or the number of responses that you get, the number of responses that you get very rarely map to the amount of people who'd be using it or live in the area as well. context and context is really important in all of these things. It's very important everybody gets the opportunity to have their say on these things, but ultimately the local highway authority, it knows what its legal responsibilities are, and it has all the legal powers available to it to determine what should happen on the road. I think one of the things that we aim to work with local authorities on is helping to understand the type of barriers that may be put up, and to help them understand really legitimate concerns and how you can address them and design them out, and also how to recognize where actually some of the concerns may not be as legitimate or reasonable as people are putting forward. The other thing that I think is really important, and from having led a highway authority, it was really difficult to always try to get the engagement, is that there is generally a demographic who responds to these types of consultations, and it doesn't necessarily represent a huge number of the people who might benefit from it as well, or who would take part in it. Like, for example, how you get comments from younger people or even older people as well about like what the impact will be for them is really difficult. And ultimately, making these changes is often contentious. Making highway changes, making changes to people's living environment can often be contentious and very emotive. And you just need to understand that and go in there with an openness to hear what they've said, but recognize that you're the decision maker in terms of what you think is the right thing to do. I think also, though, one of the things that will really help in this personally is having longer funding timeframes on this, because it enables people to more adequately plan for, right, this is what we feel is needed in this area, consult on it as a coherent piece of infrastructure or coherent network, and then go about delivering it, as opposed to necessarily having to fish for the funding for a little bit of it, go and deliver that, and then have to go and find the bit for the next bit, and then go and find the bit for the next bit. It will become significantly less impactful for people for it to be able to be delivered more coherently, and also for it to be planned that way as well. But you can't, I don't think you can escape how contentious some of this stuff is, and you just need to recognize it and go in with an openness to hear what people have to say.
I'm going to jump around a little bit, Graham, because that brings in a little bit a question we've got further down in our list, but I'll go to it now, which is from Lucy Hall in Norwich, which is because one of the lovely things about Active Travel Cafe is you've got a really lovely blend of people who work on active travel, but lots of campaigners, as you know, are here on the call. So she's asked, what is the best role for active travel campaigners to play in that local planning process? In many ways, how can campaigners support people like you and the team in getting this stuff done?
It's a difficult one. I don't want to offend you all. No, I think the thing is, again, when you come back to, like, I was a graduate in 2007, Manual for Streets had just started. And also, for example, in the area that I worked, I saw the rise of campaigns. And campaigners, like you're campaigning for something, which means that you think that something isn't right. I think that there needs to be a recognition sometimes that the people who you are responding to, either through planning consultations or highway change consultations, that they're the ones trying to do different things that you may or may not agree with, that they're people too. And that often, particularly when you get into realms of like working with local councillors and things like that, it's very rare that local councillors actually get thanked for anything, and they give up a huge proportion of their time to try to help the people of the area that they're living in. And a lot of the time, all they tend to get back is really negative feedback. And so I think you just need to recognize that and make sure that you're really civil in terms of the way that you carry on with them, and also recognize that there needs to be a degree of pragmatism. Like, from our perspective, if we were in a position whereby we were reviewing a scheme and it was 6 kilometers long and 90% of it adhered with LTN 120, and like completely adhered to it, and then there was part of it that didn't, what we would look at is like, well, on balance, how on earth do we make sure that we design that bit to be the best that it possibly can, not introduce safety concerns, and say, let it go. And I think that perhaps the same thing, being the defenders of perfection means that you stop really good things happening.
Now, but on that perfection point, Graham, just to pursue it a little bit, and we can all see the Q&A list, so we know Carlton's question is sat there, second from the top, zeroing in on a roundabout that you helped to plan. And so, I mean, Carlton's question, which I know you've clocked in the Q&A list, is about the cycleway outside a hospital in Newcastle, and a roundabout that doesn't help that continuity and creates that weakest link. And is that Carlton's question, is that a microcosm of the provision for cyclists in the UK? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, hands up, it might be. I think that the thing to bear in mind there, though, in terms of the context, is that the roundabout that Carlton's referring to and the link that takes it up to a crossing over the central motorway in Newcastle were all included in terms of the bid that for funding that went in. But then obviously you do go through public consultation and engagement with key stakeholders like Newcastle University, who are on one side of the road, and Newcastle Hospital Trust, who are on the other side of the road, both of whom were really, really open to conversations on this, by the way, and really wanted to see improvements for their staff. You then also build in timescales for things like local elections and so on and so forth, which can frustrate process or progress in terms of a lot of these different things. And then what you get to is the point that there were other factors that came into play that various people hadn't considered. The cost of materials due to conflict elsewhere in Europe had a really significant in the cost of a huge amount of highway schemes. And so what you get to, Carlton and others who kind of know the area, is a position where you've got a design for a longer stretch of the road, but you can only afford to deliver that amount based on the funding that you have available to you. Again, it goes back to the point I was making about the potential benefits through longer term funding settlements, which enable you to plan that entire route but have access to more of the money. And devolution is going to be placing more of that money in the hands of mayors and their teams who can determine what they feel should happen and where. With that specific example, like there were various different iterations of design for the junction. I'm pretty sure they still exist. And the next link on is just that the council didn't have availability to the funding anymore because of various different reasons, or the same, they couldn't do as much with the same amount of funding. But you're right, and it will need to be done. And I guess it comes back to the point I was making before about the fact that that then becomes a more frustrating position for people due to the fact that people, you're going back in to do work afterwards because you couldn't have availability for all the funding to begin with.
Thanks, Graham. So I know we've almost run out of time with you probably before that train, but we've got three kind of planning questions that I just wanted to bundle together for you before we run out of time. And one of them is from Pearl in Southwark, is about retroactively going back to schemes and implementing segregated cycleways on all roads above a certain sort of speed, and whether that's a frustration that you could address, and around LTM 120 being guidance and not standards, and so whether we can retroactively go back to things. There's an interesting question from Will in Colchester about whether we need to look at more land acquisition for LC whip routes, and whether land acquisition is part of the challenge here and compulsory purchases needed for schemes. And then finally, from Matthew in Durham, has asked a question. I'll truncate it. Sorry, Matthew, I'm not going to do this justice, but about whether planners are giving enough weight to active travel in planning decisions, or whether maybe we need to do a hearts and minds job on planners to get them to take this more seriously.
I guess I'd refer to the fact that I've got 12 minutes to make the train, so I'm going to have to be really, really quick on this.
Go.
You go back to the opportunity for a moment for the industry to change and look to it. Some of the changes that are coming through in terms of NPPF do lead towards the opportunity for vision-led planning and other ways of thinking about things, and therefore the opportunity is there for us all as an industry to look to take this. I think that the comment about whether or not planners are balanced enough, these are people who they will take a balanced view. They're also hugely overrun in terms of the amount of work that's being requested of them. RTPI and various others have pointed out a number of occasions the amount of issues associated with ensuring that there are enough people to do the work, and therefore, if you might think that they're not balanced or favourable enough towards active travel. Other people might think that they're too far weighted in that area, and I think you've got to consider it on a site-by-site basis or application by application. And we're here to try to help them. And one of the things, as I pointed out earlier, is that we've been developing a 3-year training and education program so that we can make sure that we can get around local authorities, not just with highways designers, but also planners as well, to try to help them understand what tools and products we've got available to them to help them do their job, because that's what we're here to do. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Graham. You're going to have to go. We've got 30 unanswered questions, which we will email.
I'm happy to look at them. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. And we'll post all of your responses onto our website. Graham, go and catch your train. Don't miss it.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Brilliant. Well done. Big round of applause. A thumbs up from Matthew in Darlington about being nice to councillors as well. which I enjoyed, Matthew. Don't think I missed it because I didn't. Right, that was Graham. And also, I don't know whether anybody else, but that might be a breaking news that he told us he's going to be acting in for the chief exec for the next wee while. So that's very exciting.
Steve, before
yes.
we carry on, what I wanted to do was before everybody leaves, or because I noticed attendance is dropping already. The Active Travel Cafe is currently doing a donations run. We have about £600 in costs that, to run on a yearly basis. I've already posted the link, and it was in the email. So if you do enjoy what we do and like what we do and gain a lot from it, could we ask people to please give something to us, because it helps us keep going. But I thought I'd jump in quickly. Now back to the main. That was the advert. Now back to the main show.
Excellent work, Adam, to make sure that I didn't forget to do it in all the excitement of the news roundup. Yeah, please do donate, because we know, this is really popular for everybody, and a great service, and increasingly an incredible archive of knowledge as well if you go on our website. Okay, now I told you we were turning this all on its head. So before I tell you what's coming up next week and stuff, we're going to do a UK roundup of news in your area. Anybody got anything they'd like to share with us all? Hands up and we'll bring you in. Ruth. Hello, Ruth. How are you?
Hello, Steve. So nice to see you. Happy New Year, everybody. I know we are strictly an apolitical group. However, I would like to let everyone here who may or may not be a member of the Labour Party that Labour Walks and Cycles are holding a conference on the 1st of February in Leicester. That's the 1st of February in Leicester from 10 till 4-ish. Quite a few people that we all know will be attending. And yes, I know this is apolitical, but one should be allowed to flag up things that are for the benefit of walking and cycling as well. I don't know how to put the link in the chat. I might try, but someone else might have it. Oh, someone's done it already. Thank you, Claire Stocks. Anyway, so please do that. But my other very quick news, I'm sorry, Richmond Council have just put in this about the perfect, the enemy of the good. They've put in a 100-metre cycle lane, I think it is, and there's a giveaway halfway down it for the benefit of one driver to get out of his drive. We never do that on roads for motor traffic. No one ever gives way to any car coming out of their drive with a give way sign. And this is where I get very cross, because it's a terrible waste of money and they should never have been allowed to do it, and blah, blah. Thank you, people.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth. Really good. Right, we're going to go on because we've got lots of hands up, so we'll go fast. Adam, over to you in North East Somerset.
Right. This one's something that's happening nationally. There's a Buses Connecting Communities Transport Committee has launched a new inquiry. That's on rural buses and etc. That is coming. Deadline for that is the 17th of January. Then there's also a consultation, a call for ideas, which is the Integrated National Transport Strategy. That's going, so I've just put the link in for the first one, and I'm putting the link in for the next one to the chat. This one ends on the 30th of January as well. So both of those are probably quite important. I think the Connecting Communities one, there isn't a lot of bikes on buses narrative there that needs to be had, but on the call for ideas for a transport strategy, everybody should be pouring in. I think actually lots of people are putting into that, but just to be aware of those and to put in your thoughts as soon as possible, particularly on the bus one.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Excellent heads up on those. Good. Roger, over to you. Roger Geffen.
Thanks. Well, mine follows on straight away nicely from Adam's, because I was going to say we've actually, Low Traffic Future Alliance has launched a campaign yesterday to enable you to contact your MP about the Integrated National Transport Strategy. Now, obviously, the formal, it's not called a consultation, it's a call for ideas, and it's to the public to come up with your ideas. So yes, do respond to the call for ideas, but do also use our campaign to let your MP know about this stuff. One of the things that's become apparent from the people involved in kind of parliamentary activity is that MPs are hearing a lot more from the sort of animal charities and so on than the likes of us doing climate and nature work. They're not hearing very much from us. So please kind of we do need to stir up more political debate about this whole kind of need for less car dependence. I posted a link in the chat to that action So use that to contact your MPs. And if you hadn't already done it, I've also posted a link in the chat to say, going back to the earlier conversation about planning, there is an action. It was more live, earlier, late last year, to contact your MPs about the planning reforms. Now, some of the planning reforms have already happened. It's not really so much of a live issue at the moment. It'll come back to being a live issue at some point. So if you want to write to your MPs about planning, there is an action to do that too. But at this point, with the integrated national transport strategy call for ideas live, that's the one that's the high priority. Okay.
Thanks, Roger. Couldn't agree more about both that being a priority, but also keep the pressure on, people. Thanks, Roger. That's ace. Andy in York, should we come to you?
Yes, thanks. I'm part of York Cycle Campaign, and the sort of big event this year is going to be the Active Travel Conference that was last year in Leicester, which some of us went to. It's being held on the 2nd and 3rd of July at the Barbican. Now, as a local campaign, and it's been sponsored by Active Travel England, so one would hope, who are based in York, we'd hope that we have strong input to that. But so far, we're still waiting to hear anything about the arrangements, other than the deadline for papers is the end of this month. So if anybody wants to put in 200 words on a sort of a theme or a topic which is relevant to the ideas of removing barriers and access and inclusion for active travel, then you've got until the end of the month to do that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, always super helpful that telling people what they can input to. And I just spotted in the chat from John about whether it's possible to circulate sets of links rather than just posting them in the chat. They usually will be on the website in the presentations that are shared. So if you see links in the presentations, they'll be on the website. If there's anything super crucial, we might see whether we can pop it into the reminder email that goes out. So if there's anything super important, maybe we could include it in that. Okay, always a deep breath because you never know what's coming. H in Glasgow, over to you.
Thanks. Some public transport things. I'll pick up on the buses thing. Riding a bike to a bus. Before privatisation of buses in Scotland, you could take a bike on every rural bus route in Scotland. It was a condition, and that really enabled you to get around from rural stops. We also have express coaches that run down the M90, and they stop at the village of Bridge of Erne only on request. So the driver will come down the slip road, round the village green, and back up the slip road. And we're getting quite a system now that you can actually get places, but it's cheaper to get the passengers to the bus than the bus to the passengers. And there's ways we can do that with cycling, walking, and many other ways. I'm also going to flag up Avanti are giving their voyages to cross country. They're going into Derby for modification, and everybody hates Coach D on the voyages, which I've got some screens here, but I won't do it now. You can reorganise Coach D so that you can get 4 bikes comfortably in on their wheels and an extra 10 or 12 seats for crash loading, but nobody's doing it. So I think we need to push. The work's going to be done in Derby by Alstom, I think, and persuade them to improve Coach D so that you can actually put bikes in it, because most of the time the bikes won't go through the gap into the bike hanging.
Brilliant. Thanks, H. And for those rural connections that you mentioned right at the start of that, there was a lot of love in the room. So good stuff, H. Thanks very much. Mark, over to you. Mark Strong in Brighton.
Thanks. 3 things very quickly. One is Phil. I see Phil's the scheme that we looked at for the front cover of the Times about, God knows, over 10 years ago for Brighton Valley Garden 3 and the Palace Pier Junction. Work has started about 2 weeks, well, just after Christmas. So there are actual spades in the ground and things being dug up. We're trying to
more like 15, I think, Mark. 15.
Yeah, we're trying to get Michael Barrett involved because some of the temporary traffic TM stuff isn't that great, but he's definitely intimated he's up for that one. The other thing I wanted to just raise was that the very long-winded Bus Lanes Contravention Approved Local Authorities England Amendment and Civil Enforcement of Moving Traffic Contravention Designated Order 1924 has just been made into law on the 7th of December. and that adds another 21 local authorities to the outside London to the list of councils that can use moving traffic offences, including some slightly unexpected ones in like Hull, and indeed Leicestershire, which the Leicestershire people on here may not have been realising. But I'm going to try and put together a list and add all the others together, because one of the things that's a bit weird is there isn't a list where all of them put together. There are 3 statutory instruments that list all those councils. And sadly, my local authority, Brighton, is not interested because they claim that they are too cash strapped, like all these other ones on here who are flowing in money, to put them in, which is a disappointment. But that list will be useful for other people who want to look at camera enforcement, and particularly school street camera enforcement.
Brilliant, Mark. So is that a promise you're going to share that list?
Yeah, it's just taking 3 statutory instruments, cutting and pasting the local list of local authorities in there, and just then publishing it as a list in some format. So I'll definitely share that. It's what the best format for publishing it is. It's, ideally an Excel spreadsheet would be the easiest.
Brilliant. There's nothing wrong with an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's not very visual. I mean,
no, not the sexiest thing in the world, but sometimes useful. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark. I'll come to Will and then Joseph. So Will, you first in Colchester. Oh, you're on mute, Will. While you're working that out, we'll go to Joseph. Joseph, do you want to pop in first, and then we'll go back to Will when he's worked out his audio?
Sounds good. On that, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Wonderful. Update from North East England. I work in the NHS. We've got a region-wide travel survey that was completed about a year or 2 ago. We've got some funding potentially to redo that on a region-wide basis. We've got about 88,000 staff. The staff survey is much better responded to, and it's national. But we've got a regional one for the North East of England, and the staff travel survey is quite good and should get some responses. So one day we hope that the Net Zero Travel and Transport team at NHS England will make it a national requirement, and it'll be one single thing. And then if we can get 100,000 people to respond to that, we might have the world's biggest staff survey.
Love it.
So good luck with that. If we can get that, that'll be an astonishing piece of kit, but we'll see what we can do. But we're trying what we can in the North East. But yes, just to be aware, there is a net zero requirement for the NHS. I think it's 2035 or so. There is a travel and transport element to that on a separate stream. So if we can get a couple of million people a week biking to their football game, and if we can get a couple of million people a week to visit Nana in hospital on bike, then the rest of society will follow.
Love it, Joseph. Thanks ever so much for that. When you've managed to get those million people on their bikes, maybe come back and share, do a show and tell of the millions. That'd be excellent. Love it. Loads of ambition. That's brilliant.
I mean, we've got, is it 2% of all journeys? And what's 2% of 68 million? It's about 1 million. Just add another one.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Thanks, Joseph. Will, we're going to come to you, see if you got your audio working.
Yeah, I did do it. It was behind a window. I couldn't see it.
There we go.
Yeah, we've got a bus road going in Colchester, 1.5 miles, and it's got a LTN 120 brilliant cycleway next to it. It's got a T-junction in that's going into the hospital where the path crosses the bus lane and then crosses the road. Now, at the entrance to the hospital, on the hospital land, there's a barrier, a staggered barrier. At the moment, it's out because one of the things have gone in, but the hospital are intending to put this staggered barrier back. And Essex County Council is saying, oh, yes, you'll need a barrier in case anyone runs into the road. Just wondering, what is the latest thinking? I know what's in LTN 120, but what's the latest thinking on barriers?
Can I say something on this? Because of what Andy DeGorno said. So we did a big piece of work for York City Council, pulling all of this together, which York have been really good on enforcing. So I'd suggest you go and look up somewhere. I know Sandy's got it to hand. You can put up the link and see because it summarized all of these issues. And I think out of 800 barriers in York that we looked at, I think 2 we considered were justifiable in any possible stretch of the imagination, and all the other 99% were rubbish. But it's a York City Council document. I think Andy Jameson is here, actually, who's the officer who actually was one of the commissioning officers. So if he wants to say something on that, it might be even better.
And that's online, is it, Mark?
It's online. If Andy doesn't want to say anything as an officer, I probably shouldn't have outed him, in which case
I know. That was slightly, Mark, that was slightly inappropriate, outing an officer in a public forum like that. No, and I think also, Will, we have had a special deep dive, to use the jargon, on barriers on Active Travel Cafe. So if you go through our archive, you should find at least one specific barrier session that we did.
Okay, that's super. Thank you very much.
Brilliant stuff. Okay, well, listen, everybody, I'm going to start wrapping us up. Next week, we have got Phil Jones here. Phil, would you like to do a trailer for next week's session? We don't usually do this, but I thought it might be fun to bring you in.
Coming soon.
Teaser.
Yeah. So I'm going to be with Karina Ruta, who's from the Welsh Local Government Association, and we're going to just give a bit of background and results, and then Karina will say what's happening now on the Welsh default urban 20 miles an hour speed limit, and how it's gone, and obviously take questions. So I hope people will find that useful and maybe inspirational to try and push for wide area 20 mile an hour limits where they are.
Brilliant. No, really looking forward to that, Phil. That'll be really, really good.
Yeah.
Also next week, everybody, we will have Ranty Highwayman doing the classic good, bad, and the ugly presentation on infrastructure. So definitely unmissable next week. Also, good news, and Adam's posted it in the chat, but I think, Adam, am I right? We've hit 35% of our fundraising goal during the session. You people are amazing. So we can keep on trucking. What a terrible phrase to use. Active Travel Cafe. We can keep on pedaling for the rest of the year, hopefully, if everybody keeps donating. So thanks ever so much, everybody. Just a reminder, activetravel.org.uk is the website. So if you want to have a look at presentations that people shared, Graham's from today will be up there, and Wilf and colleagues take care of updating all of that and getting all of this good stuff up online. But I think that's everything for this evening. Have a lovely evening, everybody. It's so great to see everybody. And please do join us again next week. So have a good one.